Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with another in our series of classical music in clumps. Now, I've done a couple of these lists so far, and you've received them very positively and asked me to do more. And of course, I'm always happy to accommodate. I think knowing how many of each work or type of work that various composers did is a useful way, first of all, to get to know what's out there, and second of all, to plan your listening strategy. So I'm happy to do these, and I have created a new playlist called Classical Clumps, so you can find the clumps that interest you most. It's really a good way to do it. So all of you clumpniacs, get ready, because we're going to do 12 essential piano concerto cycles for beginners. I mean, piano concertos are marvelous pieces, aren't they? You know, one of the most popular and enjoyable of all of the media in which we encounter classical music, because you've got, the gorgeous sound of a piano, the fabulous sound of an orchestra, incredible virtuosity and technical aplomb. And many composers wrote more than one. Many composers were themselves pianists. And that's one of the reasons they either wrote them for themselves or because it was their instrument and they found it particularly convivial to what they were going to do. So we're starting with the guy who invented the piano concerto. Actually, it wasn't a piano concerto in those days because there weren't pianos, but it was a keyboard concerto, and it was Bach, J.S. Bach. Now, he actually invented the piano concerto in tandem with his son, C.P.E. Bach, Carl Philipp Emanuel. It was like a family project. And Carl Philipp Emanuel's first concertos for keyboard date from about the same time as Bach's. So it's hard to say who actually did it first or how they came up with it. It doesn't really matter. I wish I could show you a series of all, I think there's 60 some odd C.P.E. Bach piano concertos or keyboard concertos, because they're marvelous works. They really are. But we're going to have to talk about those in a separate list because there's only one recording of the complete set. It's on BIS with who's the pianist? I think Miklos Spani or something like that. It's just not great. I'm sorry, but it isn't. And until we get astonishing, and these pieces are repertory pieces that get performed over and over again, it's impossible to talk about them as a clump. So we'll have to do them in a declumpified manner. But we can talk about Bach, who wrote a whole series of keyboard concertos, most of which were arrangements of works for melody instruments, and there are 7 for solo keyboard. They are splendid pieces. Absolutely lovely. They're on the list here. You can find out what their BWV numbers are so you don't get messed up with them. Lots of artists have performed them on the piano, including Glenn Gould and Murray Pariah and famous people. And they are the beginning of the piano concerto or keyboard concerto, whatever you want to call it, which is really kind of cool because we really know where it started. And it started with one of the great guys in the whole history of the universe. So start with Bach, and you'll get in at the beginning. They're really, really enjoyable. I actually did another talk about the first of them, BWV 1052 in D minor, which is a scary, relentless, motoric, gut-wrencher of a piece. Some people love it for just that reason. I like it when I'm in the mood. It's a very, very dark and interesting work. You may find it, a bit much, or you may find it just delicious. But one way or another, you have to have these 7 works. They're just amazing. So there you go. Start with Bach. He's the guy who unleashed the Kraken, if you want to call it that, the piano concerto medium. Next, after Bach, Mozart. Mozart wrote 27 piano concertos. Now, that's a number you take with a grain of salt, because the first 4 are arrangements of works by other people, another guy, and then number 7 is a double piano concerto. It's for 2 pianos, and number 10 is for 3 pianos. So there's a bit of give and take in the number 27. But Mozart was the king of the piano concerto because he invented the classical piano concerto, and he invented classical concerto form. where the first movement begins with a long orchestral introduction that lays out all the themes, and then the piano comes in, and the piano has what's called its own exposition. They have a double exposition. The orchestra exposes the tunes, then the piano repeats this, but does it in its own way, adding its own material. And so there's this sort of negotiation that goes on between the piano and the orchestra on what they're going to play and how well they're going to get along when they do it. It's really a very subtle and fascinating thing. And I don't want to get into it too much, but Mozart was the unparalleled master of the classical concerto. He wrote these pieces for himself. He was an amazing pianist, and they've been recorded a bazillion times, and they are some of the greatest pieces anybody ever wrote in any medium whatsoever, and really an unmatched cycle of piano concertos. So you've got to really also, once you've got your Bach down, you got to do your Mozart. And having done your Mozart, it's time to move on to Beethoven. Now, Beethoven only wrote 5 piano concertos. There are some miscellaneous movements and other things, and some other people have like cobbled together, like a 6th concerto out of some bits and dribs and drabs, and we don't have to go there. There are 5 piano concertos, and it turns out that 5 seem to be a congenial number, as you'll see, for other composers. And like all of Beethoven's clump pieces, the Beethoven clumps, they start in the classical style of Mozart, and they wind up close to the romantic style to come, and all of which in an idiom that's purely Beethoven's. They're full of excitement and pianistic virtuosity, but they are gorgeous, and I don't need to really describe them because they're standard repertory pieces that everyone is going to run into, all of them, all 5 of them, and they're simply marvelous. I mean, I don't need to recommend Beethoven's piano concertos, do I? Even if you're a beginner, I'll bet you've heard of them. One of them has a nickname, the Emperor. No one knows why. It has nothing to do with anything, but that's okay. It's beautiful. The last one, number 5. So you're going to get your Beethoven concertos as well. See, these are some of the most popular pieces of the entire repertoire we're going to be talking about. We really are, including the next 2. Chopin. Chopin wrote 2 piano concertos. Now, normally, when we talk about clumps, I like to have more than 2. But it just so happens that there are just a lot of really good composers who wrote just 2 piano concertos. And we can't leave them out. We just can't. So they have to be included. And Chopin's 2 piano concertos are early works. They're really best for their slow movements, which are just exquisitely gorgeous, refined versions of the Italian bel canto, beautiful song style. They really make the piano sing. They are so, so gorgeous. The quick movements, well, Chopin's version of concerto form was a little bit rickety, shall we say, and his finales are fine. They're just zippy and fun to listen to and enjoyable. And, so you have to sort of get through the first movements of these 2 concertos. But, I mean, it's enjoyable music all the way through. And they are classic, absolutely classic repertory works as well. Because Chopin was, as we know, the king of the romantic piano. So, his concertos are going to be de rigueur. There are also, by the way, a whole series of short works for piano and orchestra. Composers of the Romantic period often wrote short pieces, 10 minutes long, for orchestra and piano to be played at miscellaneous concerts where you had singers and other things. You didn't want to do a whole big long concerto. Those are almost totally ignored these days because there's no way to program them in our modern way of doing an overture, then a concerto, then a symphony. We're very formulaic, and unfortunately attempts to play these shorter pieces, and I've done some videos about them, really don't get very far. They're recorded frequently, but you don't encounter them in concert because orchestras won't do them. Soloists won't do them. They have to find something that's concerto length. My answer to that is, well, do 3 or 4 of them, and then you have a concerto length series of shorter works, and it's fine. but no, nobody listens to me anyway. So you have to find them on recordings, and I'm just mentioning them now because the next bunch of composers wrote slews of them. Mendelssohn, he's next. He also wrote 2 piano concertos. Now, the Mendelssohn concerto is actually a revolution in the form of the concerto because he starts right away with the piano. There's no big, long orchestral introduction. And after Mendelssohn, there were 2 types of concertos. The classical concerto type that has the big, long orchestral introduction in the first movement, and the romantic concerto type that just starts right off with a piano or a little introductory something, a flourish or so, and then the piano comes banging in. Now, do not be confused with Beethoven's 4th and 5th concertos, which also begin with the piano, excuse me, right away. So does Mozart's 9th concerto, for that matter. But after the little flourish with the piano at the beginning, then the orchestra does its big, long introduction thing. So you just have to be cognizant of what happens at the beginning of each concerto if you're curious about which brand it belongs to, whether it's, sort of like, Macy's or Costco. You'll figure it out one way or another. Mendelssohn's 2 concertos are delicious. They really are. Number 2 doesn't get much play because it's kind of like number 1, only a bit longer. So people tend to prefer number 1, but it's only like 20 minutes long. It's short and peppy and delightful. Absolutely delightful. So after Mendelssohn, Liszt. Now Liszt's works are a mess. I mean, he left them. He wrote, he revised, he redid, he republished. So there are 2 formal numbered piano concertos by Liszt. There is also a 3rd that was sort of cobbled together or assembled later from sketches, manuscripts, and other pieces. Then there's a whole slew of piano and orchestra works that he wrote, some of which are quite long, some of which are longer than his concertos. So, Totentanz, the variations on the Dies Irae, which is enormous fun. It's not one of the longer pieces. And the Malediction, the curse for piano and strings. And there's this piece called De Profundis, which is like half an hour. They were all left in unedited and messed up and unpublished state when Liszt died. And so other people have cleaned them up for performance, but they're really splendid. So when you get the Liszt piano concertos, just remember there's lots of other stuff besides that you can enjoy just as well. They are big, bangy, flashy, virtuosic pieces, all of his piano works that are just tons of fun to listen to. The first piano concerto is famous for having a triangle solo. It's very, very charming. Diddy, diddy, it goes like that a few times, and people were horrified, because percussion was getting a solo, and everyone thought it was like some sort of joke. And of course, Liszt had a hard time finding a decent sounding triangle in those days. Nowadays, triangles are professionally made out of surgical steel, and they're beautiful and they sound lovely. In those days, it was like hitting a pot with a wooden stick. It just went clank. So, it's another reason people didn't write triangle solos. After Liszt, we've got Brahms, who also wrote 2 piano concertos. Very, very different works. Brahms' first piano concerto is a big sort of gloss on Beethoven's 3rd piano concerto. The finales have themes that are quite similar. You listen to them, you can get them mixed up, actually, if you don't know them very, very well. But the opening is this turbulent, stormy, wonderful, romantic, passionate thing. Really, really, really terrific. And it's a long work. I mean, these are big pieces, 45, 50 minutes long. I mean, they take no prisoners at all. They're very symphonic. The orchestra is just as important as the piano, and the relationship between the two is very extensively negotiated in the first movements. His second piano concerto begins with the piano, like Beethoven's 4th piano concerto, actually, and a horn solo. It's so da da da. Ya da 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 da. Oh, it's so pretty. It's really pretty. But this is basically a symphony. It has 4 movements. including a scherzo that comes second, and a big, long, slow movement, and then a light, fluffy finale, which some people find to be almost too light for everything that's come before. I don't think so. I really think that after all of this symphonic heavy-dutiness, it's a good idea to just sort of relax and have a good time, which Brahms does in the finale. But these are two of the great concerti, difficult to play, hard to conduct. They are pieces that make everybody work. And there are some, again, extraordinary recordings of all of them, so you're not going to have a problem finding wonderful performances of them. After Brahms, Saint-Saëns. Now, when I was doing, like romantic symphonies, I mentioned Saint-Saëns as well, because he wrote 5 symphonies and he wrote 5 piano concertos, and he still never gets the credit he deserves, possibly because he's French, possibly because his musical style was very almost neoclassical. He wasn't a revolutionary in an obvious way, but his piano concerti are fascinating. Like I said, there's 5 of them. The last is the Egyptian concerto, which is full of exotic harmonies and beautiful, sort of like hanging out in the Middle East. When it was fun to hang out in the Middle East, that is, hanging out in the Middle East and hearing these sort of luscious Asian influenced spiked tunes. It's just great stuff. But the other piano concertos are really, really kind of cool. I mean, number 4 has only 2 movements, and it uses chorale themes and fugues and counterpoint. It's very different from anything anybody else ever wrote. But oh my goodness, they're lovely. His famous one is number 2. Number 2 is the one that's got the classically French. I mean, it sounds like an American in Paris. Oh, it's just great, wonderful tunes with a flashy tarantella finale. These 5 piano concertos are all worth getting to know. They're wonderful works, and like I said, tremendously underrated and disregarded. And it's a crime. Damn it, it's a crime. You hear me? They're as good as anybody's, and there's 5 of them. There's a clump, so you can enjoy the whole clump. After Saint-Saëns, the next clump is Rachmaninoff. Yeah, Rachmaninoff is so cool. We love his piano concertos. He wrote 4. 4 of them, plus the Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini, which is practically a concerto. It's 25 minutes long. It's as great as any of the concertos. So there's really 5 if you want to stretch it all out. Just terrific works. Numbers 1 and 4 are not as popular as numbers 2 and 3. Numbers 2 and 3 have the big, gorgeous, yummy, luscious tunes, and everybody plays them, but you can buy them in clumps. It's very common now to get Rachmaninoff piano concertos and the Paganini Rhapsody. They all squish onto 2 compact discs, and if you're streaming them, it's irrelevant. They're all in little digibits, but they're totally awesome, and I don't need to recommend them because they are the classic romantic piano concertos by Russian people. Of course, there's also, and I have to mention this, Tchaikovsky's first, and he wrote a second piano concerto, which no one particularly cares about, and it was cut and rearranged and whatnot, and a piece of a third piano concerto, and there's a piece called a Concert Fantasy, which is marvelous for piano and orchestra, which really should be up there with the first piano concerto in popularity, but nobody knows about it. So I didn't put Tchaikovsky on this list because it's just too problematic. It really is, but they're out there, and you know it. And if you want them to be there, well, who am I to argue? You could always stuff them on your own list. But Rachmaninoff is really the Russian piano concerto guy, followed by, as also the 20th century Russian piano concerto guy, Prokofiev. Now, he wrote 5 piano concertos. Thank you. I knew I could do that. 5 of them. Number 1 was a conservatory graduation type piece. And it's lots of fun. It's quite short, though. It's only about 15 minutes long. And it's all in one extended movement. It's really kind of delicious. And it gets played a lot, considering how short it is. But it's so insanely virtuosic. It's sort of you get more bang for your buck. So it's okay to have that sitting alone on a program. Then there's number 2, which is his greatest piano concerto. Oh, is that hot? That's in 4 movements. And it's just a behemoth. I mean, it wants something that makes soloists really sweat. The first movement has a cadenza from hell, an entire huge solo for piano that comes to this enormous climax where you're practically standing on top of your piano bench and jumping up and down on the keyboard. When I saw Alexander Taradze play it, he actually was standing up when he got to that part of the cadenza, just like, yeah, like this, yes. And then the orchestra comes crashing in. It has, by the way, no real slow movement. It's all kind of quick, and oh, it's just so exciting. It's so much fun. The third piano concerto is his most famous. It's the one everybody hauls out when they want to do a Prokofiev piano concerto. It's in the standard 3 movements. The central one is a theme and variations on a fabulous little march tune. Tan da 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 tan tan da 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 dum blum 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 blum. It's just marvelous. And it actually sounds a bit like the Rachmaninoff Paganini Rhapsody in places. It really does. I mean, you begin to hear that Rachmaninoff was heading towards a more 20th century idiom in that particular work. And Prokofiev is being sort of romantic in the third piano concerto. The fourth is for left hand alone. Nobody particularly likes it. It's an outlier in the Prokofiev piano concerto world. And while we're talking about piano concertos for the left hand alone, I did not put in this list Ravel, who did write 2 piano concertos, but one is for the left hand alone. So I thought, okay, I'm going to sort of try and stick to mostly normal piano concertos, but you can also stick Ravel's 2 concertos in there. They're splendid. There's no problem. And then Prokofiev's 5th concerto, which is a very good piece that's quite underrated. It's underrated because it doesn't have obvious romantic melodic appeal, like, for example, the third or even the second. It's a little bit spikier and more, well, what's the word? Aphoristic? I don't know if that's the right word, but it's still a very, very fine piece. I've seen it performed a couple of times, and it goes over very well. It's a delightful work. So after Prokofiev, we're well into the 20th century, and we're dealing with 2 composers who are absolutely essential. One is Bohuslav Martinu, the Czech composer who wrote 5 piano concertos, minimally. There's also a concertino for piano and orchestra, and then there's a bazillion concerto-like or concerto grosso neoclassical pieces that have very extensive piano parts. So there's a lot of Martinu. There's something called the Sinfonietta Giacosa, which is a piano concerto. I mean, it really is for piano and small orchestra. There's all kinds of stuff like that by Martinu. But if we're talking about numbered piano concertos, there are 5. And if you like piano and orchestra, you just gotta hear this guy, because he was a violinist actually, but he wrote tons of piano music, and it's fun to listen to. His 5 piano concertos are brilliant pieces. 2, 3, and 4 are the main ones. I just recently did a video about Rudolf Firkuzhny, who recorded 2, 3, and 4. He gave the premieres of all of them, and they are wonderful. Number 2 is sort of a neoclassical, piece full of chugging rhythms, and number 3 is supposedly the most Brahmsian. It's not really Brahmsian, but it's a classical concerto. It begins with a big orchestral introduction, and then the piano comes in, and it's a beefy, romantic sort of thing. And number 4 is subtitled Incantations, and it is just the coolest thing you've ever heard in your life. It's in 2 movements. It's full of spacey, strange sonorities with piano and harp and percussion churgling in the background. And oh my goodness, it's nifty. It's really nifty, but you've got to be sort of, what's the word? Not too, you have to be open-minded. Let's put it that way. It's not hard to listen to. It isn't, but it doesn't have normal themes. It has textures and patterns and gestures, and oh gosh, it's nifty. And the 5th is a lovely work with a real spiky, anxious first movement, and they're good pieces. You should get to know them. You really, really should get to know them. They get performed now and then. I've seen a couple of them, and they're just splendid. They're wonderful works, and so much of his other music for piano and orchestra, like I said, is just amazing. A great, great composer who was he's only coming into his own in the past couple of decades, more or less. And last but not least, there is Bartók. Bartók's 3 piano concertos. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful series of pieces they are. Oh, they're so cool. Now, Bartók's style evolved, but in a sort of opposite direction. His earlier works are the most experimental and dissonant and sometimes difficult. And in the first piano concerto, the piano is treated very percussively. In fact, the piano plays surrounded by a solo percussion group for most of the time. Now, the second piano concerto starts to get more traditionally tuneful, and it's a brilliant piece where the orchestra is only slowly assembled. Each movement has its own distinct character. The first movement is piano and winds. The second movement is piano and strings, and then some woodwinds and then strings. And then the finale, the whole orchestra comes together with a rondo that quotes from the previous movements. It's really a nifty, nifty piece, and it's his most popular piano concerto. Now, the third he wrote for his wife. He didn't complete it before he died. He completed it, but he hadn't orchestrated the last few bars. They were, finished off by one of his pupils. It's a lovely lyrical work. Bartók became more tonal, more tuneful as he got older. You hear that in his most popular piece for orchestra, the Concerto for Orchestra. And it's just a lovely, lovely finale to a gorgeous group of 3 concertos and to this entire talk on 12 essential piano concerto clumps for beginners, for those of you who want to get your piano concerto collection in shape. There you go. Here's the list, plus the other pieces I've mentioned as well. In the course of talking about the list, you will be set. Trust me. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.